For those of you who don't know me, I am Todd Evans. I'm the Director of Professional Development at Pro Literacy. And there you see my contact information. If you have any questions after the presentation, please feel free to email me. So what I want to talk about today is kind of 4 strategies we've identified for volunteer success in distance learning. And just a little bit about Pro Literacy. For those of you who don't know us, we're an international nonprofit literacy organization. We have projects in about 30 countries around the world. Here in the US, we have a little over 1,000 member programs. They are typically community-based nonprofit organizations, though they can be libraries. We have some correctional facilities and folks like that as well. They get their funding from a variety of places. A lot of them are WIOA funded, at least partially, but they also get grants, private donations from individuals, fundraising events, that sort of thing. And they use volunteers as the primary mechanism for delivering instruction to adults. And they provide basic literacy, pre-GED, GED, ESL, citizenship, math, oftentimes financial literacy, workplace literacy, those sorts of things. So the information that I'm going to talk to you about today, much like the M-Learning webinars, we started doing webinars as a response to our member programs and just the field in general with COVID and shutting down. And we kind of joke that we've been trying for years to get our members to use technology, visit our website, attend our webinars, and in the space of about 2 weeks, they all had to kind of figure out how to do that. So we started offering weekly webinars, and what we did is we kind of recruited program people to present at those webinars, and typically it was an administrator and a tutor, a volunteer tutor or teacher. Sometimes it might have been more than one tutor or teacher. And they talked about the aspects of implementing distance learning from a programmatic standpoint in terms of what they had to do, what they had to put in place, how they had to support the volunteer tutors and teachers. And then from an instructional piece of what the actual lessons were like, what tools they were using, and that sort of thing. And then if you're interested in kind of seeing the videos of those webinars, you can find those on proliteracy.org/webinars. We kept recordings from all of those, and then we posted the resources that came up in those webinars on proliteracyednet.org. So now let's get into the strategies. So kind of the first thing that was pretty common around all of these programs as they implemented distance learning was that they focused on making the volunteers and the students feel comfortable with the technology. So for the vast majority of these programs, they had not done distance learning previously. So when COVID hit, they kind of took a 3 to 4 week break. They encouraged the vast majority of their volunteers to just get in touch with their students and maintain contact. That was really the focus. And then they kind of recruited a selection of a few expert volunteer teachers and tutors to start to put together a plan for implementing distance learning. So they identified kind of the technologies that people were already familiar with. So a lot of ESL students already had WhatsApp. A lot of teachers, ESL teachers, were familiar with that. So that was one of the apps that they kind of gravitated to. A lot of people were using Zoom. They were kind of familiar with Zoom. They might have Zoomed with their family members. So they kind of focused on that in the beginning. They provided a lot of support and kind of walked through their volunteers signing up and getting onto the technology platform. So somebody was there just like in a conference call with one person or two or three people, and just kind of step by step downloading the app to their phone, setting up an account, those sorts of things. They focused on one technology at a time. So it was, Zoom for the webinars, and WhatsApp for kind of the texting based classes. And then, like I said, the technology that the volunteer was already familiar with. And then they encourage people, like, uh, uh, once they got their volunteers into the technology, they encourage them to use it and play around with it. So to learn Zoom, set up Zoom, calls with your family across the country, with your coworkers, those sorts of things. They had one of the programs scheduled like happy hours every week to get their volunteers just accustomed to getting on and playing with it and going into breakout rooms and things like that. And if you one of the programs said that their philosophy was they were taking the same approach to teaching volunteers how to use the technology that they would want their volunteers to take with a student. In other words, just kind of step-by-step approach, and then giving them lots of opportunity to play, explore, and ask questions. So the next strategy that a lot of them employed was really what I call a recipe for success. So kind of recognizing that the volunteer tutors were being thrust into a situation where it was technology that might be new to them. The lesson planning that they had done previously would be completely different, the way a lesson would work online or from a distance. They went ahead and they drew on their experienced teachers, and their experienced teachers created some initial lessons that all of the tutors could use. So they created kind of a set of 3 or 4 ESL lessons, a set of 3 or 4 basic literacy, some pre-GED and GED, and a lot of them just created lessons around COVID itself, so kind of health lessons and information that they would need to know. But what this did was it gave the tutor a framework, so they didn't have to figure things out. They kind of had all the materials that they needed in front of them. They had reviewed how they were going to get interaction with the students, so they could really just kind of feel comfortable and kind of confident in what they were going to do. And so the experienced tutors created these lessons. They tested them out, made adjustments to them, and then they brought in kind of a larger group of tutors. They reviewed it with them, and then the tutors had a chance to practice doing the lessons on each other before they ever went into a session with students. So almost like the programs were redoing their tutor training. But that kind of what I call kind of a pyramid of experience, of kind of relying on your most experienced, and not necessarily your most experienced tutors, but the tutors that are kind of most comfortable with developing lessons in a distance learning environment. And so that could even be younger tutors with not as much experience, but a lot of experience with that technology, and really kind of being able to visualize how that interactivity and interaction would work. So the third strategy is really around just recognizing the need for structure and support. So, and these were, they put these in place again before they started doing distance learning, and then kind of added to the support mechanisms as they went through. So we talked about the ready-made lessons. A lot of the programs had weekly tutor meetings. They had blogs, they had Facebook groups. So just lots of different ways. And they put the tutors into kind of small support groups. So it wasn't just, a Facebook group of 70 or 80 tutors. They made smaller groups where the tutors could develop a real close relationship and support network with each other. A lot of them created either technology or distance learning coaches. One program recruited a whole new set of volunteers basically to act as their own geek squad. So these were volunteers. They didn't know anything about tutoring or adult education, but they knew technology. They knew how the platforms worked, and their role was to contact the students before, like the day before class was going to be, make sure the student was going to be there, make sure they knew they had created an account, they knew how to get on the technology. They were there ahead of time. So when the teacher got onto the platform, they were there to get the teacher ready. And then if any of the students or any of the teachers had technology issues during the lesson, their job was to kind of help them work through that. And that put the volunteers at ease. You also, a lot of those experienced tutors and teachers wound up being distance learning coaches as well. So almost like a mentoring program. Uh, some of the programs even recorded lessons and posted them on their website so the tutors could go and actually see the mechanics of what that interaction looked like when you pose a question to the group and you're trying to call on people, or you're trying to get them to share a writing that they did, or you're trying to share a reading text. So just see the mechanics of what that looked like. One of the things that a lot of the programs did is they put the tutors in teams. They kind of recognized that these tutors, a lot of them have been tutoring for a while. Much like any teaching experience, the first time you go through it, it's really hard because you're building your lessons. But after you've been doing it for a while, you kind of have a nice toolbox, and it's kind of easy to pull activities out of. But then when you're thrust into a new distance learning environment, you've got to do all that work all over again. So they would put people together in teams of 2 or 3, combine the classes, because the Zoom doesn't have a upper end capacity. You can have as many students as you want in there, but that way, if I'm a tutor, I can develop a lesson for 1 week, and then the other tutors, their role is to support the individual students, answer questions, monitor the breakout rooms, things like that. But then another tutor is responsible for next week's lesson. The other tutor is responsible for the week after that. So I'm only designing lessons once every 2 or 3 weeks, and it really kind of takes the pressure off of me and allows me time to kind of think through and test what I want to do. Um, a lot of programs try to keep the same schedule for the tutors. That was really important, and just kind of um, using Zoom to have a regularly scheduled class, put that calendar up on their website. And then they created an infrastructure for sharing. So once they were creating all these resources, it was important for them to use uh, platforms like Google Docs, Google Classroom, things like that, to be able to share resources that people had created, so other folks who were looking for something could easily find it. And then the last piece is really just kind of taking a slow and steady approach. As I said, most programs kind of took 3 or 4 weeks to put an infrastructure in place. Even though folks were panicking, it was kind of an emergency situation. They took their time, kind of recognizing that you've only got one shot to kind of make people feel comfortable with this process and make people feel like that this is a doable thing. And so they really wanted to take their time and get it right. They focused on one platform at a time, one tool at a time. So we're just using Zoom right now. We're going to get comfortable with just doing the webinar aspects of it. Once we get comfortable with the basics of it, then we'll explore breakout rooms, or then we'll explore using the whiteboard, those sorts of things. Once we get comfortable with that, we might bring in an external website like Kahoots or Quizlet or something like that to create additional supplemental practices. And then they slowly added components to the lessons and to the services that they provided. So the ESL lessons, for example, in the beginning, they focused primarily on conversations, oral conversation. And then as they figured out how to add reading and engagement with reading and writing and sharing writing. They would add those components to the lessons and kind of broaden them out. And the same thing with the services. They started with kind of smaller classes. They weren't kind of worried about enrolling new students or things like that. But then kind of as people got their feet under them, they started to add those additional services. So that kind of process of slow growth allowed the volunteers to feel comfortable with where they were at, and the students as well, comfortable with where they at before you added something new. So just to kind of recap those strategies: develop comfort and confidence with the volunteers in the various tools that they're going to be using. Give them kind of a recipe for what they're going to do in the beginning so they can just focus on getting their feet under them. They don't have to do lesson planning. They don't have to kind of think through different technology pieces, that sort of thing. Provide a lot of support and structure and interaction, and even kind of broaden how you've thought about using volunteers in your program in terms of using them for technical support or research, or recruiting volunteers maybe to just create quizzes on the different websites and games and things like that. And then that kind of slow and steady process of growth, and not trying to put everything in place at once. Just put enough to get started and then slowly grow.